children are really good observers, and they learn well by watching. And so one of the things that parents can do up front is to model good conflict resolution right in front of the kids. When there are disagreements, they can see that, hey, you can disagree and you can do it calmly and you can do it respectfully and work your way through an issue. And so parents have a lot more of those kind of opportunities to display in front of their kids than you would typically for kids who are gone for large segments of the day.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host, Jim Mason.
Hello, I'm Jim Mason, President of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and this is another episode of Homeschool Talks. Today, I'm glad to welcome my good friend, Dr. Stephen Duvall, who is HSLDA's Director of Research, to talk about a topic that will be of interest to all parents, really, but especially to homeschool parents. Welcome, Stephen.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
So today, we're going to be talking about an article that you've written that deals with helping parents with their working with squabbling siblings, which any parent that I know probably knows what a squabbling sibling situation looks like. Before we get into that, Stephen, tell us a little bit how you came to work at HSLDA and a little bit of your background. I'm sure some people may have missed our other episodes.
Oh, well, Jim, I'm a Christian husband and father of 3, grandfather of 7. And I spent about 40 years in the field of school psychology. And about half of that was in the schools. The other half was as a professor, directing programs on school psychology. And but Jim, I've also spent about 27 or 28 years consulting with homeschooling families, when they had special needs children and that type of thing. So the path was a long one to get here. And then I came here about 2.5 years ago and been working as the research director since.
So what kind of things are you working on now as the director of research? Just give us a little outline of what you're doing.
Well, right now I'll write articles on various issues, but probably the most important project that we've got going on is like a year-long study on academic achievement and how and what parents do during instruction that help them make the progress that they do.
And that's you're tracking some homeschooling families throughout the year for this whole school year, right?
That's exactly right.
Well, very interesting. So tell us what should parents do when they have squabbling siblings, or how can parents, not just homeschooling parents, but any parent, how can they create an environment that will reduce the squabbling among siblings?
Jim, probably one of the things that they can do that's as important as anything else is to avoid any show of favoritism, for one child over another. That can really develop a lot of animosity between the siblings themselves. It can give the slighted child, as you will, a real poor self-concept. It can also create real issues, between the parent and that child as well. And another thing, many times when favoritism is displayed, it can be done by the father, it can be done by the mother, it can be done by both parents. But it's actually worse if it's going to be one or the other. It's worse when it's done by the father, and then it's especially destructive when it's done by both parents.
What is it about the father that makes it more destructive if that's the parent that shows?
Jim, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what to say about that. I just know that the research has identified, the paternal favoritism as one that's more destructive.
And so this topic you've surveyed the academic research on these questions, and this is, where your opinion is coming from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So how do you avoid showing favoritism? What kinds of things? I mean, so I have 7 children, and sometimes you do favor a child in a moment for a reason. And sometimes children perceive favoritism that maybe I didn't even recognize. How do you deal with all that in a family?
Well, I think that you can't deal with it perfectly, and I think that's why you're going to have some, tension between siblings anyway. And there are other things, Jim, that kind of set the stage for that, and it could be like children who are real close in age. They can be more competitive with one another. You can end up in situations where just differences in sex, that can cause extra tension. Or sometimes just the personality types that we're dealing with. All of those can impact the sibling tension in a family. But a lot of times, yes, you might be able to, as a parent, you might be identifying with one child, more so than another child. It's going to be seasonal. It could be something that, like a mother may be closer to children when they're tiny and that type of thing. But eventually, one of the things that has been found to help is that eventually, if you can continue to communicate with those children and let them know why you deal differently with another child than them, that helps too. So lines of communication are really, really important.
So we call these podcasts Homeschool Talks. Is there something about homeschooling that can actually help alleviate these kind of sibling rivalries and conflicts that may not be available to parents who do a more traditional kind of schooling?
Well, Jim, I'd say this is be a good time to mention a large study that was done, came out a year ago, and it showed that actually in homeschool families, there was a lot more forgiveness that was displayed by the children in homeschool families. And it was a very significant finding, statistically significant. But that being the case, they didn't get into why that normally occurs or why that did occur. But as I've studied children, worked with families and that kind of thing over the years, what I would suspect is going on in a case like that is, with smaller groups, you have, let's say like you've got a family of 3. And 3 kids are being homeschooled, and you have a lot more opportunity as a parent to monitor those kids, kind of insert yourself into a squabble, when it first starts and that type of thing. And in other words, you can stay on top of those kinds of situations, maybe even provide corrective feedback, show the child what they should have done in the first place, before it got out of control. But it's much easier for a parent of 3 to do that than it is when you're in a classroom and you've got 18 or 20 kids. And another thing about that, so you can monitor and just kind of manage things much more closely. You don't have to spread your attention across 3 kids versus 18 to 20 kids. And in a classroom, one of the things that often happens is that there might be 3 or 4 that demand a ton of teacher attention. And so a lot of those kids, they just kind of continue to function without very much monitoring and very much management, and little things can turn into major issues. But it makes sense to me that homeschoolers would develop better interpersonal skills and be better at interacting with others, including, forgiving others for, times when things got out of control, just because the parents have the time and it's a good setup for giving the kids the attention that they need during those kinds of episodes.
What do you think about homeschooling families that I talk to, and I experienced it in my own family? The children aren't segregated into age cohorts, but the youngest child is in the family and in the home, interacting all day long with older children who, and they're just typically not as, I'm in 3rd grade kind of dependent, and I don't don't associate with fourth graders. Does that contribute at all to this, do you think?
Oh, I think it would, just because they continually have more opportunity to engage with people of different ages. Again, that is typically something that is found to create more tension among siblings, and so this would be another reason why homeschooling works well for for children who are able to better communicate and deal with people of all different ages.
What other things can parents do, generally all parents, to avoid the conflicts among siblings?
Well, one of the things, Jim, that is always good is remembering that children are really good observers, and they learn well by watching. And so one of the things that parents can do up front is to model good conflict resolution right in front of the kids. When there are disagreements, they can see that, hey, you can disagree and you can do it calmly and you can do it respectfully and work your way through an issue. And so parents have a lot more of those kind of opportunities to display in front of their kids than you would typically for kids who are gone for large segments of the day. And another thing that they have found to be really or have a lot of impact on the way kids learn good behaviors is not just by watching people in person or people that they look up to and how they interact with issues, but what the kids watch on television. And if you're trying to model for a child, good behaviors and that type of thing, how they should, come to a good conclusion of a disagreement, when they watch others doing it terribly or disrespectfully, or watch something that's out of control, which a lot of those happen on television. They're very inappropriate things that or ways that siblings on television might settle their conflicts and that type of thing. So the television can be particularly powerful in what children learn to do, unfortunately.
Well, so a lot of homeschooling families homeschool because they, they're motivated by their religious beliefs to model their children and throughout the day help them learn how to follow the Lord more closely. Does that contribute at all, do you think?
Well, I would think it would, Jim. I mean, that would good morals and that type of thing, and good displays of ways that people interact with others, of course, will come through teaching, that has a very kind of a religious or faith-based backing to it. And that, again, is just, to me, it would just provide opportunities for good, disciplined, healthy ways to interact with others. And so I would say that could play a big part in it.
In my family, I say this frequently, and I'm still kind of amazed by this, but we began homeschooling kind of as an educational thing, or at least I did. My wife wanted to homeschool more for reasons of transmitting our faith to our children. I would only kind of consent to it back in the early days if I thought it was going to work kind of educationally. But I've come to, over the years, really value the fact that all of our children, they're now all grown, 7 kids, they're very close with each other. And as far as I can tell, I mean, they're very close to each of us, Debbie and myself. And I really attribute that to the fact that we chose to homeschool them. For all the reasons you said, we had lots of conflict, and I had to learn how to model good behavior more than many probably had to. But even that, the crucible of the family, and a purposeful, intentional life, trying to do things, the right way, and being, relationship focused, really. That's what I've come to conclude, that homeschooling helped me to be relationship focused. Any validity in any of that, or am I just out of left field here?
Well, I don't think you're in left field. Jim, compared to my family, I would look at yours as considerably larger. And one of the things that I've just run across here recently is a study that showed that larger families, they can have more overt squabbles, during the developmental years, but they also have a tendency to develop deeper relationships emotionally, over the years. So yeah, a lot of that kind of rings true with with stuff that I've just been recently running across.
Well, thanks, Stephen. This has been very interesting. Is there anything else you'd like to add about how homeschooling parents in particular can reduce sibling conflicts and engage in good conflict resolution and that sort of thing?
Well, Jim, I would just say, again, just to reiterate what we've been talking about here, I would just say, do your best to avoid, showing favoritism, model good behavior, and really try to restrict as much as possible the unhealthy types of things that the kids can watch, because, that sets a bad example for them. But by doing those things, I think you're not going to eliminate all of sibling squabbles, but you do have it does give you a better chance to control it and minimize it.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Stephen Duvall, my guest today on Homeschool Talks. I hope you all out there would find this to be encouraging. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well, so please feel free to contact us through the link in the show notes. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your friends on that thing that you do that thing on, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And go to our website at our HSLDA.org to learn more about what we do to protect and advance homeschool freedom and to make homeschooling possible. And thanks again, Dr. Stephen Duvall.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for having me.
Every week, HSLDA hears from hundreds of homeschool families, many of whom are facing hostility from school officials or discrimination from colleges and employers. We've helped single parents facing criminal charges for homeschooling their children, families traumatized by wrongful CPS investigations, and even a grandmother harassed by the state for homeschooling her granddaughter. By donating to HSLDA, you can help make homeschooling possible for families like these and enable our work to preserve freedom for future generations. Give today at hslda.org/donate. That's hslda.org/donate. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.